Let's check out some of the differences between Kraftur and Kraftur Focus. First thing we'll look at will be CPU resources and the latency. So if I enable the original Kraftur, we see that it uses about 8% CPU resources in this particular DAW, and the reported latency is 0 milliseconds. If I enable Kraftur Focus, the CPU is a little bit more, 10%, and there's 43 milliseconds of latency. This is the latency that is required in order to maintain the phase coherence between an original unprocessed audio sample. So the main reason we introduced Kraftur Focus is for that reason. If you want to use Kraftur as a send effect, or you're working with parallel processes and you don't want to use the red triangle for blending. So let's listen to an example of that. I've got a drum stem on the first track, a copy of that drum stem on the second track, and then some synthesizers. So we'll start with no plugins enabled, and then I'll turn on Kraftur, and we'll hear the original issue, which is why we introduced Kraftur Focus. So right away you can hear, it might be a creative effect that certain people might want, but that is generally not the sound we're going for when we're working in parallel and we're trying to add more excitement and different flavors to the original unprocessed track. So that is the main reason we introduced Kraftur Focus. So with the same settings and with the focus button enabled in the bottom right corner, now let's listen to the difference with and without Kraftur Focus. So there is a little bit of a hiccup because we have to add that 43 millisecond latency. The host has to do the delay compensation to the other tracks. So that's the little bit of the hiccup that you hear, but we do not hear that phasey weird issue that we had on the original Kraftur. Another way to test this, instead of turning the whole plugin on and off, we can just use the bypass button. So we'll leave focus on. I'll do the bypass so we can hear that it's relatively the same signal. It's much better phase coherence. And then I'll turn off the focus button so we can hear essentially what the original Kraftur was doing. So the next question you might have is, if I turn focus off, is that the same as the original Kraftur? In some sense it is. You have that same issue if you're not working in parallel, but you're in Kraftur Focus, so you will be using slightly more latency and slightly more CPU. So if those are critical in your session, go ahead and go back to using Kraftur. What we're going to do now is just show how you can do a sort of layering with parallel processing. So the way I would do it is I would first solo that drum track. So we're just listening to this with Kraftur Focus on here. I'm going to turn focus on, and then I'm just going to dial in Kraftur to the sort of exaggerated sound that I'm looking for. Okay, so it's totally blown out, 6 dB of drive, and we're changing the multiband shifts. We're 100% multi, so those are all in effect. But what I'm going to do now that we have the focus is I'm going to drag this fader to 0, and I'm going to slowly bring that up with the original track. So now I've sort of blended in an effect in parallel, and this is a similar workflow to what you might have done on like an old analog console. And that's sort of the main benefit with Kraftur Focus, and that's how we intend everyone to use it. If you don't do that workflow, you can still just use the normal Kraftur on your original source audio. So in this case, Kraftur is inserted on that original drum stem, and we can essentially set up a blend between multi and dry. We can go back to, let's see what our settings were. We'll do 6 dB of drive. We'll move the shifts around here. And now we've got that same blend in parallel all on one track, and we don't need this duplicate track here, and we won't have the phase issue either. So that's the original workflow with using Kraftur. And the great thing about it is you get both of these plugins, Kraftur and Kraftur Focus, in the same installer on the same license. You don't have to pay for, Kraftur Focus if you already own Kraftur. You can just head on over to soundtheory.com and you'll be able to start using everything. So yeah, with that, thanks for watching and feel free to contact us if you have any questions.